All right, we are live. This is PBF Live, and today joined again with Nectarios and buddy Slade. And since we last talked, because we had Slade on here back January-ish, we were discussing his journey into the church, and today we were gonna dive into some of like the occult, demonic, satanic aspects of communism, Bolshevism. We've got a lot potentially on the plate, a lot of notes to work with. We'll see where we go with everything. However, back when we talked then, there was a lot of discussion of kind of where Slade was at, how he got to there, and since that, things have changed a bit, in a good way for Slade and his family. And some of you may already be aware, but some of you may not. And Slade, if you wouldn't mind kind of covering where Orthodoxy has taken you and your family and where you guys are now, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, uh, it has greatly impacted our lives for the better on pretty much every aspect I could ever think of, like whether it be just interrelations, right? Like the way that we interact with our kids has improved, the way that our kids interact with us has improved. But not that there was like a problem that we could have recognized previously, but now it's just like it's on just another level. The way that the church has impacted our lives, right? Like having a foundation for the reasons why we do the things that we do, and what obedience means, and what obedience to your parents means, and the way that we as parents interact with our kids. Dude, it's it's amazing. You could just see like even more smiles and lightheartedness in the way that they step in their lives now too. Uh, and
Well,
that's just obviously on the felt lived experience of this uh, time that we've been in the church. And it's, dude, I obviously like the only way you can explain it is it's Christ. And uh, like again, we were talking before we started recording. I think it's just like so much extra grace right now, bringing us into the
can you
church.
back up a bit too? Because maybe people don't even know, like you, since we spoke, I mean, you guys, everybody, all you and your wife, your kids, everybody's now a member of the church and baptized on
Yeah,
Holy
baptized,
Day.
chrismated, great Saturday. It was like, dude, it was such a blur, like Holy Week, um, because we obviously were like in every single service, and it's just multiple services.
Uh,
It's like,
it's
yeah,
brutal.
it's
It's
dude, it's
brutal.
amazing. It's so cool. I've never come close to an experience like that. It's like you are you are there for every step of the. It feels like you're there mystically through every step of the entrance of the Lord and into his crucifixion, his resurrection. Like you're there and you can feel that, and it's so wild, man. Like I never I never in my life imagined myself excited to go to church and like wanting to be in church. Like even growing up Protestant, I was like, it was just felt like this obligation. And it's like, why are we even going? Right? Like what is the purpose of this? And now it's just like everything just makes sense, and you know why you're there and what you're there for. But yeah, like we got 7 months of catechism, and again, we were talking before, but I know that that is a short time, but obviously it's whatever the priest's discretion if he feels like you're ready to be baptized. And he's the one that made us catechumens as well. Like we've been going, the whole family, and are just like head first involved, like wife's cooking and bringing stuff for trapeza right away, and like involved with families in the church right away. And it just seemed like it was this perfect fit for everyone. And so priest Father Josh was like, hey, I don't ever do this, but I'm going to make you guys catechumens if you are all right with that. We're like, yeah, let me hit you good. Yep, absolutely. All right, let's do it. And then we didn't look back, and fast forward to where we are now. Yeah, we got baptized, chrismated, and now being able to participate fully in the sacraments, it's like that's everything that's missing from what I thought Christianity was. And obviously, it's so much more than that. Because again, it's like I don't ever feel like I'll learn enough. It's just this never-ending spring. It's not even a well. It's like this spring that keeps flowing with the history of the church, and then the wisdom and the knowledge of the fathers of the church and all the writings. It's some of these guys were genius. Some of them were like uneducated, but they were just, what united them was that love of Christ and the grace that Christ offered all the saints and the church fathers. It's crazy. But yeah, obviously, like, I sound like a lunatic to anybody that's outside of this, but it's
yeah. You know what? Actually,
I can't even explain it, dude. I can't explain it. I just, if you are seeking Christ, become Orthodox, and like that's the only way that I can. I'm not knowledgeable enough, and I don't have the vocabulary to ever try to explain what it can do to your life and how you see what the purpose of life is there.
One of the ways I heard that was like really beautiful. I've been reading Saint Porphyrios, Wounded by Love, and it's like he made a good comparison of like, when you're young and you fall in love with someone, like us as dudes, you see that girl and that's all you can think about when you're working, when you're doing whatever. It's like all you can think about is them, and it's like it's that madness, but with like it's a madly in love with Christ, and it's just like that's all you can think about. It's like, man, like that's all. Like, if there's a story of him walking and he's like passing by like some layman in Athos, and his elders would always tell him, hey, if someone passes by, hey, like respectfully, hey, with your blessing, let me pass, but don't talk to them because you don't know what they might say. And they looked at him and you look kind of crazy, and they're like, look at that poor boy, he looks so insane. But he was like, if they really knew how insane I was because of like my madness of being in love with Christ, that I want to obey my elders, I want to be at the services, whatever they do, it is just like there is a kind of divine love and madness in that is just like, no, like when you taste and see, it's like it completely just changes your whole perspective on your whole life, that there's nothing else you want more than, it's just like it's never enough. And it's like, and you come to realize that it's like, okay, I can do more, I can be better, I can let go of more things. It's like there has to be less of me and more of him. So yeah, no, I definitely get that madness, and like reading that with Saint Porphyrios is just like, oh, it was like perfectly described that. Yeah.
I'm curious if I may interject and ask Slade, the community that you come from, both the gun as well as the SEAL community, what's been the response? Has there been much? And I guess what's it been like, what you have had?
I'm not really like involved in the SEAL community anymore. I'm so, outside of like a few buddies here and there, but there hasn't been any as far as that goes, nothing negative, nothing like really positive. I did have a friend actually reach out to me recently. He was like, dude, you were in a dream that I had, and it was crazy. He's telling me this dream, and he's like, we were outside of this Orthodox church, because I guess he had gone to Ukraine or something, right? And I was like, okay. Well, in the stream, he's like, we're outside this Orthodox church, and he's like, you and I were like in this gunfight, and I'm just like listening to this thing. Okay, well, stuff, I wouldn't be there. Secondly, God, I hope I'm never in a gunfight again. And then he's just like going through, and he's like, and there's these like, and he obviously he's not Orthodox or anything like that. He was like, there was these two dudes in like these hoods and standing there like just praying. And I was like, have you ever seen like a schema monk? And he was like, no, what is that? So I sent him a picture. He's like, dude, that's exactly what those guys look like. And I was like, wild. What? This is so weird. And he's like, yeah. He's an artist too. I was like, you should just sketch something up. I think that'd be really cool. But
pretty wild. That's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting too, the schema monks.
Yeah. And he never heard of one. He never seen one before. So I sent him the pictures. He was like, holy crap, that was it. But as far as like the gun community goes, man, I think there's just so many people out there right now that are, and obviously, like, I'm speaking in generalizations. I can't speak for every single demographic within, subcultures within subcultures within subcultures, but for the most part, the people that I interact with, I think are like seeking the same thing, right? And it's like, once you know the truth, it's like, why would you ever want to say anything else? But I always just say, like, if you're seeking Christ, keep going, you'll become Orthodox. Don't stop. Don't ever become comfortable and settle. And like, until you know that that's the truth. And it's obviously like giving a personal account for what truth is like, hey man, this isn't my belief. I believe in these, in the church. I believe in the teachings of the church. I believe obviously in the Bible. And the more I read the Bible is what led me to the Orthodox Church. Like, it's like, you can't read multiple passages, but you can't read the epistles and say, yeah, you know what, that is the Roman Catholic Church. Or, you know what, that is the Protestant Church and every other sect that's out there. No, that is the Orthodox Church. Like, rationalize, use your scholastic brain. That's what I did at first. I was like, why is there all these readings, writings talking about this church, and that the truth lies in the church and the teachings are in the church? And then you come to the realization, because I've been an instructor, for multiple years, teaching different skills, like even in the teams. I was an instructor for CQB, shooting, and like tactical ground mobility. So like, you're just teaching so many different things constantly, and I could not write down everything that I needed to convey to you. I couldn't. It's impossible. I need you to be present, and I need you to be in the same room with me, touching the same instruments, whether it's like I'm teaching you how to use this crappy app that we had to use back in the day called Falcon View for navigation. And dude, I used to teach this 4-hour mind-numbing class on it, but there is absolutely no way I could write down everything that I needed to teach you there. I needed to be there to show you all the quirks, the bugs, how to fix problems multiple different ways. There's no way I could have written it all down. Just like if I was going to teach you a class on CQB, there's no way I could convey what I'm trying to convey, and the knowledge and the information. There's no way that would happen just writing it down. You would have to be present with me in the room. And I would have to have all of the tools as well. Like, I would have to show you the roles and responsibilities of each person in that stack, how to hold your weapon, how to manipulate your weapon, how to step through a freaking door, how to read a door. Like, I would have to teach you so many things in person that would never be able to be written down. And that on top of the Bible itself refuting sola scriptura and Protestantism, that was like what clicked for me too. Is like, of course, it's firsthand knowledge, not secondhand account through writings, right? And it's good that we have SOPs that we write down. It's good that we have all of these AARs that we write down, and it's the best that we can recall these things and try to condense it and put it into words. But it's one thing for me to be able to show you something. So that right there was just like, all right, yep, that clicks, because you're so anti-tradition when you grow up in America. You're anti-tradition. Yes. Well, you're anti-true tradition. You're very pro traditions of modern man. Yes. In America, right?
Which could be a fleeting tradition at times.
Right. Well, we've come to see that like there's no truth in any of it, because right, there's bits and pieces when you grow up in America that they can try to piece together to convince you, and it's very convincing arguments, especially like the culture that we're raised in is always to question everything. And I do agree with questioning everything, but when you have
which could be
the information that is presented to you that is showing you the truth, like there comes a time when you do start to accept things as well. But yeah, that being able to relay information and wisdom and knowledge just through writings, through epistles, is impossible. So that smashed that paradigm for me of like, wow, the traditions do matter. The firsthand accounts and knowledge and wisdom being passed down person to person is what matters, right? Like, that's exactly how the training process works. Like, you have a raw product, then you can train and mold this raw product into now you send them into the world to do whatever it is you've trained them to do. They gain wisdom and knowledge, and then that person that started from zero knowledge or information or experience now becomes experienced and full of information and knowledge, can pass that stuff down to people. But it takes that personal account for it to be complete.
Yes, and there's such the important experiential aspect of Orthodoxy, and you've touched on this. I'm not sure if you said it beforehand or during this, but how you're actually excited to go to church now. Something as a Protestant you didn't feel like the actual to be there. And I mean, how could you even? I don't even know how. It's one of those things like you can't even put it into words. It's just something you've got to. If you're not Orthodox, you gotta go there and see what it is, what it's about.
Yeah, and not to say that like we're excited to be there, but it also takes work to show up. Like
Yeah.
It's because it's a lot of commitment, and it is like it's not that we're suffering to go there, but there's a lot of sacrifice that you make to be as involved in the church as we all should be, as much as we possibly can be. Obviously people have to work. We all have to work and make a living and everything, but when you can start to form your life around the life of the church versus the life of the world, that's been very key for us, I think. And again, it's like Heather gets excited when she's like, "Ooh, I can make this," and like it's a way that she can serve. It's a way that she sacrifices, but she's up late preparing things and up super early in the morning getting it ready.
Glory to God.
Yeah, and it's just not be like, "Ooh, look at how hard she's working," but I'm saying
it's out of love.
It's love. It's all love, and it is true labor of love. And it's like, even as I'm working in my garden, I'm like, I can't wait to get this big enough to where we can share this with everybody. We share, the eggs with people at church because we have a glory to God, like crazy bounty of organic eggs.
That's so awesome too. Like you were talking about that kid, because when we were a few weeks back, when we were all talking, and there's some kid, he's autistic or Asperger's or something?
No, it's like severely autistic, and there was other complications at birth. But dude, he's
but with those eggs now too, it's helped him to have some cognitive improvement.
Correct. Yeah. And again, all glory to God that we even have the place, that we've met the people that we've met, and we have the ability to feed the chickens the way that we feed them, and have them in the space where they're happy and making so many eggs that are healthy. But yeah, cognitive improvement in this little dude. It's since switching him over to us being able to bring eggs in. We just, every time we get enough, it's just like we just want to keep sharing, and it's wild, dude. Like I find myself as I'm working in the garden, like just asking the Lord to bless every labor. Like you were saying, it's all a labor of love, and having everybody wants to talk about this. Well, not everybody, but one of the arguments is like, I have a personal relationship with Christ. It's like, man, I don't even think that you can even come to understand him without the Orthodox fronema and the teachings of the church. You can't. And again, this is all limited human understanding, but these are the ways that through the lens of the church, like there's so much information and knowledge on how we're supposed to live.
And it's so true too, man, like you're saying. And I hate at times, well, I don't hate, but I feel challenged because I feel like there's a part of us when we say that, because I say all the same things that you're saying. And as I say it, I'm also like, people must think we're so conceited, but it's like, but that's not it. That's not it. But I fathom that that's what people must hear, like, and I don't know what to say, guys. And forgive us if, that's how it comes across, but it's the reality. And when you become a member of the church, and you can speak to so many people who've come into the church and they've experienced that, because there's such a reality of that, because especially too, as you're talking about, you're in the garden, your wife's doing this, and I know Nectarios, the things that you're involved in with your church as well and everything. And, there's a term in Orthodoxy that's really important, and it's about Christ. It's kenosis, and it's self-emptying love, and that's giving yourself, your all, to other people like that. And there's such a reality of that in Orthodoxy, and you feel the fruits of that. And yes, it's not easy. It's not easy to do a vigil. These like all night vigils and things like that and everything like that. But you know what? At the end of the day, you're with your family there of the church. You're experiencing these things together, and you're with your family there in the church. You're with the saints. You're with Christ. You're with the angels. You're experiencing all of those things together, and I just got goosebumps. But because it's real, and I can only say that, and that reality is on a metaphysical level.
Yeah, it's extremely tangible, and like even like how Slade was saying, like even just serving in that, it's like you come to see the praxis of it and what it really does to you. It's like all these things, like the teaching example is perfect. It's like even when I was teaching T-Triple-C, it's like, yeah, you can I can show you PowerPoint slides and all this stuff, but until like you're in the weeds, it's like you really know what you're doing. And then it's also a good check of like, oh man, I really don't know what I'm doing. Because you can have some guys that can spit out all this knowledge, but if they can't do the prac app, then it's like, bro, like you're useless at that point. You know what I mean? So it's like, but when you start doing it and you start learning it, things start making more sense within that, like even that orthodox perspective and that correct way of doing things. And it like, it makes things so much more sense. And then when you're doing things in the church and you're living things, and like we were talking earlier, like when you're going through the services, like Holy Week, like that week is just like, it's so heavy. Like I was participating in like helping things, and I dude, the unnailing of Christ is like, I had missed that one last year. This year was the first year I got to go to it, and but they were like, okay, we got the sheet and everything, and they're like, all right. And then when we came down, I was like, okay, I'll help out, like whatever. But then it's just like, I was the one holding my arms out with the sheet while they were like taking him down from it, and I was just like it was real, you know what I mean? Like you feel it like in your soul, and it's just like, oh my gosh, we really did this. This really like happened, and it's just like you don't get that. And some people might say an over emotionality of something, but it's like when you're fasting, when you're praying, when you're doing all these things, it's like it just supplements to what is already there, So it kind of like builds on those blocks of like our spiritual life and where we're supposed to be. So when you live through these things, it's like it happened, but it's happening, and it's like, and it completely changes. Yeah. And then
I remember that. Oh, sorry, Slade, go ahead.
I was just saying, time and space doesn't exist. He says it happened and it is happening. That's what I say. Like, you're metaphysically linked. You are there participating in all of these moments. It's again, it's unexplainable, and it makes you sound crazy unless you're in it and you're living it.
But I remember the first Holy Week I participated in, and it was the Thursday night reading of the Gospels. Ooh, I got choked up there. But man, it's painful, man, when you're just going through that and imagining that level to take on the human form, and then to be at that moment where you're about to endure such incredible pain and suffering. And I mean, it's redemptive, it's what was needed, but knowing like it was our own mankind, we brought that destruction upon ourselves, death upon ourselves, and the only way that we were going to be redeemed was by God's own sacrifice. And to be sitting there, he was the sweat, the pain, the trembling, and everything that he was going through, knowing what was just coming next, and knowing too, think about that too, hanging out with Judas the whole time, and knowing this guy is going to be the one that's going to betray him. Like, it's coming from him, and there's nothing changing that. And like, we've had our own people we call Judases in our life, but oftentimes we weren't aware how much of a Judas, or even that they were a Judas, until finally the betrayal happened. And knowing that Yeah, this is the guy that's going to do it. It's coming. It's just so wild.
Yeah, you did touch upon a good point that are kind of like going into like the stream of like most people try to rationalize all these things, but it's like, how do you rationalize God? It's like you can, and it's like going back to like this madness. It's like, look, there are things that we cannot explain, and that's the vastness of it. But when you live and you experience it, it's just like, what more can you do? Like Slade was like a really good example. It's like when you see your instructors and they're doing it, you're like, they know something I don't, and you see it, especially when you have a good instructor. It's just like you see something in their eyes when they're teaching and they're showing you, and it's just like they've seen something, they've experienced something that now they're trying to show me. And a good thing, the same thing with the church. Like you see these things, you see the priests, deacons, monks, and everything, and just when you're living there, they're living their life, you see that and you're like, no, there's something more here that I can't explain. And until you live it, it's like, yeah, you can't explain it. And the rationalism is what kind of completely now starts distorting what things are. And then when we see that throughout history, and
Well, forgive me too, man, Nectarius, but I think one of the things that's important in, you know, what I've seen with Orthodoxy and, what I've seen too overseas, what I've experienced it with it too, is even in the countries where they have more money into it, it's not as if, yeah, I know there's exceptions and I just thought of them, but I've been to Serbia as an example. You don't see these priests and such living eloquent, the elegant lives and things such as that. These are people that they've elected into the priesthood, and especially here in the United States, there's so many people who are part of the clergy who don't have jobs, or I'm sorry, they don't have they're not making money from the priesthood. It's not that sort of a vocation. It's a vocation that they have outside of usually doing other work. You'll have priests that is their only thing, and they are able to sustain a livelihood on that. But it's not like in any way, shape, or form. They're not driving the Mercedes and all those other things like that. Like it's a choice of an ascetic life of sacrifice with multiple responsibilities behind it, and it's all out of love. Again.
Yeah, and there's no pension plan either.
Yeah, yeah. Like if a priest wife passes away, he joins a monastery. He goes and becomes a monk. Like that's kind of what it usually happens. That's their that's their pension plan is living in a monastery, and that's not an elegant lifestyle either.
I was gonna say, unless you're in the Greek archdiocese.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Like Greek priests, they get paid, but Rokor priests, they all have second jobs. Friend Father Moses McPherson, he has a secondary job of construction, just construction, and he's a full-time priest.
And to say to that too, that is so much work. All the services and then counseling to the people. There's that's two other jobs entirely in itself, at least.
I have no idea how to do that. And yeah,
I mean,
no
and how many priests too are married, and it's just often like their wives are very involved with the church, and they very rarely see their wife, even though their wife's so involved in the church, just because they've got so much going on. That's just the reality of it. And that's okay. I mean, that's okay. Like I am only saying this just to say like how encompassing it is. And I'm not trying to like pump my chest or anything like that, because the reality is like that's us. Our prayer and God is should be our priority, and so yeah, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and priests, they're called to suffer as well. Like, and it's like what you're talking about is our priest's wife just died, and
Yeah,
he's my oldest son Michael was talking about the priesthood already. So Father Joshua was over here the other night for dinner talking, and he was just like, hey, it's a life of suffering. He's like, there doesn't mean that every single day he's like, you're called to it though, and you have to it calls you to rely on God even more. And yeah, man, he was with his wife since they were 17 years old, and he's 62 now, and she just passed. And it was like watching him go through that, even it just affirmed in me that we were in the right place, the way that he was able to handle it and the way that he is able to still shepherd the flock. It's crazy to see somebody who can rely on God so much to that where they're still functioning the way that he is. And he's not
Good
like
example.
he doesn't try to hide it at all. He's like, hey, this hurts. This hurts. I don't even know what to do without her. And he's like, he's so humble. And he's like, without you, the parish, he's like, there's no way, it's like between you and God. And he's like talking about the fact that the parish is there because of God, and that we're all able to rely on each other. And watching him go through that, it was just like confirmed I am in the right place. And to see someone in like the lowest point of their life being able to do what he does still, and it's just like, I don't know, it's more of a lived witness and attestation to the truth in Christ, like for me, seeing this.
No, same, and that's the same thing with my priest as well. Yeah, he lost his wife a few years back, but she's up at the monastery up here by me, and yeah, like, and he still continues. He's like, look, it's like I'm still here. God has me here, and it's like, where else am I gonna go? He's like, then like this is it for me. He's like, God has put too many things that it's just like, yeah, there's a hurt, absolutely, but it's like, you know what? He knows what's best for us, and he hasn't let me down since. So he's like, I'm gonna continue being here, and he's like kind of stuck in this in between. Funny enough that you're mentioned of like, hey, some of them go to the monastery, and he's kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I'm. And I love him to death because he's admitted, he's like, you know what? I honestly don't have that kind of. He's like, that's tough. He's like, I like my freedom. And I'm like, hey, God bless him for it. He's like, you know what? He's like, I commend all the fathers that are up there, and they're super cool up there. But yeah, he's like, I'm not in a place where I'm ready to commit like that to somebody. You know what I mean? He's like, yeah, God bless all the fathers up there who are with Father the Theosis, who's the abbot up there at Holy Archangels, and they're like, yeah, it's like, that's a whole nother commitment as well. It's just like fully committing your whole life to someone to guide you to Christ. You know what I mean? To the abbot is, it just shows it's another type of love of like dedication to Christ that even like it's astounding like how people just do that, and like just, yeah, hey, I trust you with my life that you're gonna guide me to Christ, and even in these hard times. But yeah, and most people, yeah, that rationalism is like, oh, I would never do that. It's like, bro, then you like it's I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way. Like, it's something that, yeah, it's, I don't know. Like, you look at these, like, the priests, the monks, and these abbots, and it's just like, man, their love and commitment is something else. And then the struggle, and then now that times are kind of easy, so to speak. But even like, you think about during hardships of like being a priest during times of persecution, you know what I mean? And even just like 100 years ago, with like the Russian Revolution. Yeah, it was like, bro,
the topic of today.
Yeah, perfect segue.
Yeah, if you guys are okay, if we could shift towards that. If there's anything you guys want to say before we shift to that, because I'd like to jump towards it if you guys are good.
No, yeah, that's a perfect shift, because I was talking with, funny enough, a buddy of mine, and it's like, no, it's like when you start coming into the church, it's like you put a target on your back, like the demons know, and things like of the world start all of a sudden noticing. It's just like, oh, like before they were just kind of toying with you or toying with us, and then when they see you're getting serious, they're like, okay, no, it's game time. And I've heard Father Turbo mention this, and I've heard some of the monks as well. It's like, no, like, hey, welcome to the struggle, bro. Like, it's real. Yeah. And like Slade said, you do notice. Yeah.
Actually, for leading up to baptism, he was warning all of us. He's like, you're gonna see an increase in demonic attack because you're declaring yourself in opposition now officially. Like, you are it's like an enlistment process. You are enlisting in God's army into the church militant, which is so rad. The church militant.
Yeah.
Like you are proclaiming yourself an enemy of Satan, and so of course the attacks will happen. It's so many other people are just so captured they have no idea that they are being influenced daily by demons, and that's what it's like. Anything good that you do in the world is when you are matching your will to the Father's will. That's the only reason why good exists, is because it's when people knowingly or unknowingly are matching the will of the Father, and that's what good is.
Yes.
Evil is a choice, and evil is not something that exists. It's a consequence of choice that people make, and so when you say evil exists, no, the consequences of people's actions do exist, and that is evil. But good does exist, and
Well,
it's
and-
only through the grace of God.
Well, and evil exists by the rejection of God. You know,
Correct.
that's
It's you choosing to go against the will of God, right? The will of the Father.
and that's the fall of man, the fall in heaven. Both
Which
of those
is
things.
also a consequence of a decision made, right? So death entered the world, and we live in a fallen world. It's the consequence of a choice, and it's a choice of first to sin, and secondly the lack of repentance for the sin and reorienting yourself back to Christ, back to God. And that's the world that's the consequence in the world that we live in today, and which allows people to still make the choice to do evil.
So I think there was a question I saw in the chat, and I think it actually, in some ways, I can see it kind of tying together. In some ways, what we've got here. Somebody asked about James Lindsay and his new discourses blog, and so before I came back to Christianity, to God, and people who have familiarity with PBF, and I've talked about it many times. One of the things that's always been important is truth. And then obviously along the way, you discover truth as a man, and mind blowing what the logos really means, because you hear, in the beginning was the word, but in Greek, it's in the beginning was the logos, and that's the truth. And along the way, I did come across James Lindsay, and I was really big. I enjoyed some of the stuff that he did back then, and I thought, it was cool. The way he was exposing the fraud that exists in academia now, because he's a mathematician, and he and was it Helen Pluck Rose, and I forget. It's actually one of the guys up in Oregon. I can't remember his name, but there are all these like super rationalist kind of atheistic-y kind of people, but they try to maintain an element of truth to it. And he did some really great stuff covering some different pieces of the Frankfurt School, a lot of the different lefty communist type stuff, things like that. At the end of the day, my issues I've got with him is his utter rejection of God. And so it's like that over rationalistic, skeptical approach to life has been what's doomed mankind. That's what, that type of a perspective. And ultimately, we're going to talk about one of the topics, at least I've got in here, and I don't even know how much of all this we're even going to cover today, but Dostoyevsky in his Demons, he covered a lot of the, middle 1800s, the leftist movements that occurred in there, and ultimately the nihilism that occurred. He has no religious affiliation. He's an atheist, just so you know. He's a complete atheist. If you go and you see anything he's got online, the guy's kind of saying here, and it's the last time, for right now, that I'll address too much of this, but he has absolutely no religious affiliation. He's completely rejected religion and says that religion is one of the problems for mankind. So, and that's completely in opposition to the three of us here in our standpoint on, we totally think that God and religion, Orthodoxy, is the answer. And so we're on a completely different kind of side of looking at things. And so that's basically what I'll say as far as that goes. So I think we're going to be getting into, like as the name says, satanic Bolshevik communist revolution. And so I think it's important, just to kind of reflect first, in 1917, there were a lot of things that were building up to what was ultimately the Russian Revolution that occurred to it. But it had such a huge impact upon Russia in itself. Russia was a country that was very slow in moving towards their rejection. They were part of what was the Byzantine Empire, kind of trailed off, and what had been moved through Constantinople. And after everything fell in Constantinople, it was one of the nieces that ended up moving up to Russia. You've got Holy Rus, which actually started around Kiev and moved up ultimately and settled in Moscow. You've got like Saint Vladimir that started a lot of that. So there was a lot that passed along, and the Romanov family carried that, what's seen as, emblematic, or fully, not just emblematic, fully representative of, the holiness of the church on earth. And the Bolsheviks came into power, and when they ultimately went after the Romanov family, and many of the Bolsheviks themselves that were fighting even admitted to what they did was very horrible. They raped the daughters of the family. They committed acts that were very ritualistic and satanically ritualistic against the family. And on a metaphysical level, it was one of those moments, that just, it was a tear in the fabric of reality and the destruction. And so the people of Russia suffered immensely. Now, the people of Russia brought it upon themselves, because that's what we do as mankind. You reject God, you stand in opposition to God, you become apostate, and horrible things come from that. That was just the political and social climate of late imperial Russia. It was rapid industrialization, it was urbanization of the country, and it led to just significant social unrest. The class struggle, the Marxist ideas were spreading from Western Europe, and it made it easy for revolutionary groups to come up. The Bolsheviks are one of those groups that came up. And the biggest strength against what they were trying to do was the Russian Orthodox Church, because it had just been a pillar for the society for so long. And it began
backdrop of World War I going on as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you forgot to touch on that, because I think maybe people don't realize that these things were concurrently brewing and happening, and were all catalysts for the Bolshevik Revolution.
Sure. And that's the thing too. It's important too. And I thank you for saying that, because I don't want it to be like an absolutes and things like that, because there's always multiple factors, and usually like multiple factors are usually what helps to create revolution, because there's usually multiple things. Well, there's multiple attempts, right? Like take the Summer of Love a few years ago. There'd been a couple of times where the powers that be had been trying to kind of create revolutionary forces, if you will, to make things happen. They had the Breonna Taylor, they had Arbery. That was the guy that was jogging through construction sites and taking things while he was jogging. And he was killed by those guys. Then there was the Breonna Taylor, where she was taking drug packages from her former drug dealer boyfriend and got killed. And they tried to use those to spark revolution, but when they happened to have the COVID lockdowns tied together with that, that was the perfect kind of thing. Because especially you could go out and protest, couldn't you? And you wouldn't catch COVID, but everybody else would catch COVID. But the doctors told you that if you were protesting, burning down buildings, you wouldn't catch COVID. So, there's, as an example of how the forces, and so Slade brings up World War I was going on, which was very destabilizing at that point. And a lot of, at that point, when World War I was going on, many of the, well, it was like that final, like, hey, we got to take down the Habsburgs. You know, we've got to take down all of these remaining ruling powers of the
A lot of the
royal
monarchs. Mm-hmm.
yeah, the monarchs, the royal families, you know, and so much of that had started with the Jacobins, and you know, even our revolution in the United States, but the Jacobins was especially brutal, in what they did, and that was really an early form of the communism, what they did in France with a lot of that stuff. Because you'll even see there's a magazine in the United States today called the Jacobin, and those guys are they're fun to watch peripherally sometimes, but don't watch them too much because they're sad and pathetic, and they've got dysgenics and all those things. They eat a lot of vegan food, so they don't look good. Um, but you know, thinking about what was going on in Russian society at that time as well, a lot of the occult and a lot of esoteric practices were going on there, and you saw it too, because Romania, we may touch on that. There was a lot of that was kicking up in Romania, with just like paganism and folklore as well. But also too in Russia, you had simultaneously a lot of artistic, like avant-garde, futurism, and then you know, like some of the Dadaism was spreading over. Which the interesting thing about that is, with God, there's beauty, and with some of these movements, there's just that rejection of beauty that you see as well, and it's another kind of just a layer foundationally that's going against that. Um, you know, and the intellectual climate with a lot of these Eastern European countries, it was really receptive to a lot of these occult ideas and practices, which is always what's so interesting, because I feel as if it's one of those things that we're seeing in the United States as well. You know, it's like, and we talked about this in the last time, you know, when you look at these things, it's cool to say you're spiritual, but your spirituality to be full of occult tarot card practices and yoga and all these other things. Somehow you're not religious. You're only religious if you're some form of a stricter form of Christianity. If you're not a strict Christian, then you're probably doing tarot cards. But just the idea that when people become somehow intellectually enlightened, that they somehow find themselves accepting occult practices so much more, and that's okay. You know, it's interesting how that works on a metaphysical level.
And I'm wondering if it like form of that is like pride, because even in the, what is it, leading up to 1830s was a lot of that Western influence along the aristocratic like levels of like Russia was like happening. A good little short book is A Man and His Faith. Talks about all that influence of like, you know, the bricklayers and a lot of esoteric stuff like really creeping in. But when when you're so disconnected sometimes even from the church at those levels, that it's like you're not really in practicing and putting the things that you're supposed to, then you can keep your ego, your pride at check. So then it's like, okay, I'm not that special, I'm just another person trying to align myself with God's will. But when they step away from that, then they start getting influencing by these things, and you start seeing like things like that, like the rationalization, Thomism, things that just now starts becoming more like, oh, I need to rationalize all these things and know it. And then and that starts creating things to doubt, like the things of God, the things of the church, and then that creates those little cracks within your belief, which then the devil is so easy to just kind of slip into these like small little things, because he comes at you with like a twisted truth, but it's enough for you to kind of bite at it. And just, you know, with our passions, it's so easy that, you know, it's like, oh, okay, you like attention? Cool, yeah, we'll give you that. No worries, we'll make you feel special. And it's like, you know, he's not wise because he's the devil. It's because he's old and he knows like how to kind of play with us. But we've given him all those advantages of like, you know, of just giving them free reign through our mistakes and through our passions, our pride, or whatever you want to call it, you know. But yeah, the influence definitely starts coming in and creeping in the further we are from God, and the further we are in our praxis, or the way we kind of live our life.
And definitely the secret societies really started taking hold in Russia at that point, you know, and you know, it'd been a slow kind of buildup along too in Russia, because if you go back to things like Peter the Great, and he was setting up his court, there was only like the people would only speak French in the court, and so then the necessary influence of that, the aristocracy, it was just kind of a continuation of that they were speaking French. So then naturally what's going to occur, they're going to be interacting with the French people, and the French people are some of the most revolutionary people there in the country as well. And so of course, the revolutionary ideas are going to creep in, and so, oh, it's so sophisticated to be revolutionary, it's just a natural, and it's the pride again. And then of course the people too, like, oh, the French speaking people, look at them, they're revolutionary, don't you want to be like them? Come on guys, don't be all backwards.
Yeah, and funny enough that even with like the French Revolution and like different points of that, what is it, Bakunin, I think that's his name, who ended up over there and like was instigating even more of that stuff. It's like things were bad, but he's like, no, it's got to be a constant revolution, a perpetual one. It's like an implacable type of destruction of continuously bringing down the old order of these things. And it's just like, and you can trace a lot of that within societies of like these small little influences, but it's like it's a constant destruction and a constant revolution. And when you have that, it's like it's a destruction of order. So it's like God is order and discipline and love. And it's like when you have your left and right lateral limits, you know what's safe and what's good and where your bars are. But when you're outside of that, it's like, man, you're in the unknown, and that's not good. But when they're constantly destroying that, then it's like you can't put your feet on the ground, and it becomes a wild disaster. And then everyone who falls into that is just being used as cannon fodder for a constant destruction. And it's kind of sad that it's like people are looking for something real, so this over emotionality of like, yeah, well, we could build it better, build back better.
Our enlightened minds are just so much better than those silly religious people. We're wiser. We can do it all on our own.
Well, yeah, it's like Nietzsche said, you know what I mean? God is dead. When you over rationalize things, you kill
Well,
him.
why dead though? Why did Nietzsche say God was dead? Because man killed him.
Yeah, man killed him. And funny enough, I was just reading that it's like he was going to seminary school as a Protestant, and like, but when you rip out things out of like the Bible, it's like you lose the ascetic aspect, you lose like the difficulty of like carrying your cross. And it's like when you join the church, it's like, no, you fast, you have to pray, you go to the services. Well, it's like, well, you get to choose, but it's like when you start going, you realize like, oh my, like this is difficult, this is extremely hard. I have to wake up early, I have to do my prayers, and you start noticing. And it's like, but it feels good to struggle. It's like, like you feel like you're achieving something. But when you completely rip that out, it's like, yeah, no wonder Nietzsche felt the way he did, because it's like you've ripped out the guts out of like a core portion of like Christianity to struggle. So yeah, no wonder he stopped believing in God. It's like you took away the thing that gave it meaning.
Well, and I think that's important too, what you bring up there. Because next on the list I had to actually talk about was Dostoyevsky. And it's interesting, like when you compare like Dostoyevsky and Nietzsche, because Dostoyevsky was very leftist when he started out. However, before I get too much into that, with Nietzsche, he actually said that his favorite psychologist was Dostoyevsky, and how much he respected Dostoyevsky. And like, I'll just say this about Dostoyevsky, for years I struggled to read Dostoyevsky. It's hard. It's hard to find a good translation sometimes. And I think the first one I read was Crime and Punishment, but it probably took me 10 tries to read the Brothers Karamazov, because like the first, it's over 1,000 pages, and like the first 100 pages of it, it's setting the groundwork for it. But man, like, it's such an incredible story. And I did that before I became Orthodox, and now going back and reading it, I understand it on a, you know, a spiritual level a bit more. Yeah. I don't know, before I dive into that, did you want to add anything before I dive into Dostoevsky, Slade?
I was just going to say that, you know, we were talking about the spirit of rebellion or revolution, and it's the same spirit that was there in the garden. I mean, it's the same influences all the way through. You say pride, it is pride. It's like I know better, and I don't want to submit to anything, and I just want to have all this information and knowledge for myself. That's why it's like so self-serving. When you look at the spiritual but not religious, it's all about, like, what do they say? Self-care now is like a big thing. But
Yeah.
when you look at the root ideology of the spirit of rebellion and revolution, it's always the same. It's like me first, I'm in opposition to. And again, I totally understand it. Like, it's probably not a surprise to anybody that most of, I mean, at least 50% of the country feels alienated by our own government. And obviously we don't like the things that we're being subjected to. So it's easy for people to, because of our fallen nature, to fall into a spirit of rebellion and get fed these ideas and these demons, driving people into the same, again, not a total repeat, but there's echoes of the rhyme of things that have occurred previously, like the spirit of revolution that was in France, right? That came from an atheistic worldview, or theistic, but not a Christian worldview. And I would say the same thing, that they use people, you know, the useful idiots and everything. They use people that maybe and I would just say this: not everybody's ideology is going to align, but the people that are driving this these revolutionary ideas are their ideologies are aligned, and they are being completely influenced by demons, I would say, as well.
Well, and I think that's really important. And it's funny because I mentioned you guys when we kicked off here, I was talking to an old friend of mine earlier that we were going to be discussing this. And, you know, I'm glad you said that, Slade, because you tied this together very well to what he was telling me. And I even said to you guys, and I didn't mention it, so thank you, that it's about the destruction of mankind. And, you know, you've got to recognize that, as you guys were saying, you know, like you're on the radar, you're the church militant, and you're going to be a target. And even when you're not a target, at the same time, the destruction of mankind is what it's all about. It's Ephesians 6:12. You know, man, like, what is it? I can't even think of it right now.
You don't fight against flesh and blood, but the powers and principalities.
I was trying to remember that flesh and blood, and I was like, I am not saying that right, and I didn't want to say it wrong. So thank you. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
And that's the hard part too. Of like, even if you think about it, that it's like we're so like played by our passions too, that it's just like, you look at someone, and it's a trap too. I know that most people have maybe heard of it, but even like I didn't think about it before. You know what I mean? Of like the things that are happening in the world. It's like, it's so easy to look at someone and be like, man, like, dude, you suck. You know what I mean? But the reality is like, no, like they're under an influence of things that they're not even fully aware of. That even now, it's like, for us also, it's like Christians, it's like, love the sinner, not the sin. You know what I mean? So it's like we still have to love that person because they're made in the image of Christ. But it's like when they're doing stuff,
so true.
We're so quick to just jump up to judge people.
True.
Yeah, so it's like, and it's like, no, it's like we have to be angry at the things that are influencing them, and it's tough because it's just like, bro, we see it every day, and it's like a constant you know.
And it's also extra difficult. It's also extra difficult to separate those two things, and at the same time, it's like it's extra difficult because we know it's a participation as well. Like, it takes you participating in your influences, whether you know it or know it. That's why I said knowingly or unknowingly, and that's why we ask for forgiveness for sins that we've committed knowingly or unknowingly as well. But there is some form of participation that must occur for these thoughts and ideologies to come to fruition and manifest in this reality. Like that's the truth about all of that. So whether it's us participating in the will of God or it's us participating in the will of the demons, it's
Well, when you open yourself up to that, it's exponential. What the resulting, especially when there's no repentance there.
yeah, it just grows and it becomes. The easiest way to show this is like, you know, those memes, but they're true pictures. It's like the anti-woke memes. I'm doing air quotes because whatever wokeism, like I hate talking about it. It's so stupid. But it shows like the girl that looks completely normal and pretty before, and then it shows her now, and it's like she's cut off her body parts and is on hormone therapy and is like tattoos on their face and a shaved head, and you're like, wow, yeah. So that's a physical manifestation of matching your will with the spirit of the world and with the demons.
Yeah. No, that's really good because that's really true. I mean, it's grotesque how quickly it seems to happen now too. I don't feel as if that's always been the case, but that to me also seems indicative of just the how far the world has fallen too, as well, how rapidly it happens. And to think of with that culture itself now, how mutilating people are, and think about that too, like that must give the demons such satisfaction just to watch the people just slicing off body parts and becoming some bastardization of Baphomet right in front of everybody's eyes, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if y'all have seen what is it, Nefarious, but that scene when he's like talking to him, explaining how like the demons work was like a perfect example of like what we're talking about. Is like it's not all at once; it's an escalation of these little things, and it's just like, and the more that we give them and allow them to do these things, and the more we participate in those things, it pushes the boundaries. And I just like think about things like out of my own life. It's like you know, it's like when I was younger, it's like, okay, it's like, oh, you know, it's like, oh, it's smoking a cigarette, and then it's like, oh, I'm just taking a little bit of alcohol from my mom's stuff, and then it's like, oh, it's just weed, bro, and then it's just, you know, but it's an escalation, and it's like, and even things in society or even in like in the world, and you look at things in cultures, it's like, it's a small little escalation, and then to the next, until it's just like, man, how did we get here? But it's like if the devil comes at you with like straight up like, oh, let's go murder people, he's gonna be like, oh, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna do that. But it's a slow, like, it's like the boiling frog, you know what I mean? You have to slowly kind of turn it, and it's the same thing with us. It's like he reels us in with these things, but when we don't see them, and it's just like, and now it's gotten to a point where it's just like, oh, bro, like they're straight up like just throwing the whole worm in, like the whole bucket.
Yeah.
It's insane.
If I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Dostoyevsky a little bit more now. So, if you couldn't tell, and anybody that follows us hasn't noticed, I mean, he's just my favorite writer by far. He's amazing. And it's just like what you find in his work is that it was just he's got a profound understanding of what was or what is the Russian soul, and then just the potential of like nihilism to take a hold of the society itself. And he had some very prophetic visions. And one of the pieces I'm really going to talk about a lot is demons. It's demons, devils, possessed. There's some different names, and it's a translation type of thing. But it's really just like a chilling glimpse of what we've been talking about, the spiritual and just moral void. I'm just making up words now. Void that made Russia really susceptible to like the revolution that was the Bolshevik Revolution. And think too, like he was writing this in like the 1850s and 1860s, and you know it was 1917 that this took place, and he saw what was going to happen there. You know, you got to recognize too that his own life experiences that he, as a youth, was involved in a lot of revolutionary circles that were, again, part of that outgrowth from what was coming from Europe. He was in 1849, he got arrested because of his participation in something that was called the Petrevsky Circle. And that was a group that discussed socialist ideas, and they criticized the Tsarist regime back then. He was ultimately sentenced to death in a labor camp in Siberia, where he was exiled. And what was interesting is he faced a mock execution while he was there, but he ultimately spent 4 years within that labor camp. But and as you see with other people, because I think that it's important to recognize prison, people make this statement at times, and while he was there, he realized how horrible a lot of these ideas were. Just the nihilism, the dark nature of that world, and that's actually what made him change his life. And we, as well as people, at times we put ourselves in our own prison, and then we recognize at times what that prison is, because of, as you know, most people listening to this are Orthodox, but if you're not, it's the passions. That in some ways it's similar, like you've heard of from Roman Catholicism, the sort of the deadly sins, but it's deeper than that, and it's more than that. But it's the trappings of the passions that tend to imprison us as well. And it's about finding the way out of a lot of that. But as he came out of the labor camp there, he ended up ultimately down the road writing Demons, and he has some characters in the book that really describe the revolutionary movement that was going on. And there's a character, Pyotr Verehemsky. He's based upon actually a real life revolutionary in Russia at the time, Nechayev. And it was just a ruthless and immoral kind of character. And, that's what a lot of these people too. It's back to that ego, something that we've talked about before, but it's like, hey, I don't need these morals. I can be amoral. I can do what I want. And it's something else in Crime and Punishment that he talks about, because the main character in Crime and Punishment is a guy who decides that Raskolnikov, he's going to commit the ultimate murder, and he's going to get away with it because he no longer has to live by the morals of mankind. He doesn't need that, and the guy's just tortured, and ultimately it's about his struggle and redemption in that book, and it's through suffering and faith. And he's got many other characters in his books like that. The thing about Demons, though, is I can't suggest this enough, and be sure, if you do decide to read this book, get a good translation. I recommend Michael Katz. It's important because it's actually really funny, because he mocks these characters ruthlessly in there, and you'll find yourself laughing at just how stupid some of these people are with that. One of the things that goes hand in hand with the characters that he's got, and that he is very noticeable when you're reading this, is so many of these characters, they've either got weak fathers or they lack fathers. And I mean, come on, that's like something that we hear in society today. This is something very important, and as Orthodox too as well. And well, Christians recognize the idea of the father, I hope, but in the church itself, we have our priest who we call father. Father is an important figure, and these characters have such poor morals. The family structure has been eroded, and so the failure of fatherhood. It's there's no morals, there's no spiritual leadership, and so it's a void. And what does it get filled with? It's destructive revolutionary ideas that lead to the destruction of mankind. And so he's describing these characters who ultimately want to overthrow the Tsar. There's at one point where they kill a Bishop Tikhon, which is interesting when the Russian Revolution, where there happened to be Tikhon that was murdered by the Bolsheviks as well, quite prophetic in that. And so he's just laying the groundwork for the type of people who are going to destroy the Russian society and lead up to this. And I think that's what I found very interesting about it. And back to Nietzsche as well, is that, you know, what people don't even, I think, recognize is when Nietzsche talks about stuff, what's coming for society, he's not always like saying like this is like, hey, this is something to look forward to, guys. Like he's like, bad things are coming. And these bad things are coming because you've rejected God. God serves a purpose for us. And even though, you know, like um, Doc said here, he, well, his father, you know, was a minister and that was part of his rejection, but he was a part of that culture and he knew some of those things, but that guy was miserable too. Like this is a guy that died a very miserable man. And I'll see people at times occasionally online, you know, like just in discussions, and they hold Nietzsche and his ideas of his nihilism in such high esteem. And it's I don't know, man. Like I see it even in the manosphere, the red pill movement. There's these guys that are really big on like, oh yeah, man, go read your Nietzsche and this is the way you want to live your life. Like, really, do you know how he lived his life? You know, he went mad from syphilis and died, and probably caught syphilis from a prostitute because no woman would have anything to do with him. Sounds pretty cool, bro.
You gotta be that super base, Superman, Ubermensch, super soldier, brother. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it's, dude. And even I remember like, yeah, Nihilism, like by Father Seraphim Rose or Saint Seraphim Rose, I guess I should say, correct myself. But yeah, it's like when you look at it and you follow that all the way through, it's just like, if God isn't true, then nothing matters. Like you said, yeah, anything is permissible. Morality is completely destroyed. It's completely subjective, and then you start seeing that play out in the long run. So then it's just like, then then why shouldn't I, unalive other people? It doesn't matter. There's no afterlife. There's nothing after. And then
No
and
consequence.
it starts like peering into these other little groups of just, and then when you have that, it's like, then it leads and opens up gates to be able to do just about anything. And you see that like throughout all this time, and it's just like in these influences. But I'm still kind of surprised that even with like Nietzsche being alive the same time with Dostoyevsky, that there wasn't like an aha moment, like, oh, maybe Dostoevsky's onto something. You know what I mean? Because like for him, even that fake death sentence, for him it was like a huge wake up call of like, yeah, like the Tsar's gonna kill me. And then and funny enough, like in that prison when he was writing, he turned into like a Tsarist. Like after that, coming to real, like you were saying, and all those realizations, you come to see like these philosophies, how empty they are, and the richness of like being within the church and actually reading the fathers and going into it. It's like, no, there's something that's completely different. But
Yeah, that would be probably an issue of pride and repentance, right? I mean, Judas and Peter both rejected Christ and betrayed Christ, but one repented and one didn't. And you see the outcome of that. So I just, again, Dostoevsky was able to humble himself and see the error of his ways, right? Whereas Nietzsche held on through pride till his death.
Well, and that's so hard for people to do. Like, how many times are people wrong and they know deep down they're wrong and they know they're suffering? And to let go of that would be to admit you're wrong. It's far worse for them on some level mentally to admit they're wrong than to release the suffering. It's just,
It's the pride and the egoism. And I mean, that's it's so weird that your pride can allow you to suffer in that way, just so you don't have to humble yourself. It's weird. It's such a weird human condition, and it's so strong in some people, and it who knows what it takes to humble someone. But at some point in their life, or after they die, they are going to be humbled.
But isn't that funny? The whole idea of rationalism and enlightenment, that we somehow, we try to build ourselves up that we're beyond all of this, but yet at our core, we're just grossly irrational creatures. Like there's a book I read some time back called Predictably Irrational, and it just goes to prove that, like the whole concept that we're rational creatures is grotesquely overstated. Yes, we're capable of rationalism, but the idea that we're these ubermensch that are going to just solve all of these things, I just find it funny. I don't know. You brought up something too there, Nectarios, Doc, that about Saint Seraphim Platina, his nihilism. Have both you guys read it?
I have it. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I've gone through it. It took me a bit because it's like I don't
it's
have a philosophy background, so it's like trying to like understand some of these concepts. Like, yeah, it took me a while, but like after reading it, it's like okay, it's absolute
funny.
gold.
Well, it's funny too because the first copy I got of it, I gave it to Lucky, and what I did actually, because it's so difficult, because it was so heavy, but I read like the first two chapters, and I was, but yeah, dude, like.
Yeah,
I was underlining stuff, and like along the sides, like the copy that Lucky's got for me has so many notes in it. And it's so chock full. It's like because I was talking to a buddy of mine this week. I was talking to him about Saint Isaac the Syrian. Saint Isaac the Syrian has a really it's like a thick, couple inches thick, his homilies, but like you read like 2 pages and you're like, there's so much to think about right here. You're like, that's not going to be a page turner. This isn't going to be a book that you're just going to be like, hey, I'm going to read Saint Isaac this week. Well, you can, but you're not going to grasp it. And that's kind of no, it is where Saint Seraphim is, but yeah, I think to the point is that he pointed a lot in nihilism to his analysis of the nihilism and its role in the Russian Revolution. It's based on a Christian worldview, and it's a, to like Slade was saying earlier, it's again, it's that rejection. It's the modern era, but I think what's really important to Ephesians is nihilism's a demonic philosophy. It's you're rebelling against God and the created order, and you're trying to overturn like all traditional values, all institutions, and it's this illusory freedom and progress, like, and maybe that's part too of why you get some of these things now with people that can't even admit when they're wrong, because they think that destructive nature is the creative nature, that chaos. I'm thinking out loud. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, definitely something along those lines of like, yeah, it's and the twisting of what it means to be courageous or brave also is another thing too, because it's like to admit you're wrong also takes courage, but it's like now it's more of just being right. But even in being right, what does that even mean also, you know what I mean? And so that's another concept as well that people have, like to differentiate. It's like just because you're right or correct doesn't mean or just because you're correct doesn't mean you're right,
Yeah.
So it's like you can also have an overcorrectness of things, but it's like the twisting of all that completely destroys the ability to try to be humble, because it's like, well, I have this image I have to portray, or I have this and I have to do because this is what is right, but it's like right according to whom? And when you don't put God in in his proper place, then it's like, then it's my will, and then it's like, now it's like, I'm God. I say what's good. I say what's good for me or my family, whoever, whatever it might be. So it's like, instead of like allowing that right, the correct and the loving understanding of, yeah, you know what? I was wrong. Forgive me. Because what that actually does is that actually builds courage, builds strength, and that builds trust. But when you have that within a society, within people, it's just like, then it's also like, it de-escalates things. But that's what makes things even better, because it's like, you read about it in the, I was reading it the other day, where there was two monks walking. There's the elder, and then there was like a novice, and real full of zeal or whatever. And then he goes running ahead of his elder, and he runs into like some pagan priest or whatever, and then he starts kind of like berating him. Oh, you don't believe in the real God, blah blah blah, all this other stuff. And then this pagan priest beats up that novice. But afterwards, the elder like comes and he kind of sees him, and he sees this pagan priest. He's like, "Man of God, how are you today?" And it completely just de-escalates the whole situation. They start talking, and they have this good conversation. And then, and then afterwards he leaves. And then a few years down the road, that same pagan guy comes back to the monastery as a monk. So it's like, just even having the humility instead of like trying to berate, like, yeah, granted, in a sort of sense, like, that novice wasn't wrong, like that the other guys believe something incorrectly. But when you don't come with someone with humility and love, it's like, you're not going to overturn them and like show them what it really means to like love Christ. But that's the thing. The other thing that's missing within societies is that, like, we have, going back to the pride again and like passions, when we don't give that up, God can't move. And when you don't have like the cleansing of your nous and cleansing of your soul, that God's light can't reflect outwardly to other people for them to kind of see that. And that's the other thing that's also missing. It's like, when we don't, and that's something that's like, even for me personally, in all of our lives, right? It's like, if we don't live that, it's like, then what are we really doing? Because that's what people see. Like Christ says, it's like, they will know you by your fruits. They will know that you are my disciples. And words sometimes only can do so much, but when they're not living it, it's that praxis that, which turns people away.
You just described the difference between knowledge and experience with the elder and that novice, and the way that they handle their situations. Because like you said, the novice wasn't incorrect in rebuking the pagans, but he was inexperienced in how to rebuke the pagans, right? Whereas the elder was rebuking the pagans, and in a way that he knew would work the best through his experience. I mean, that's huge, and that's just one aspect, multiple levels from that story. But that's something I garnered from that,
for sure.
And so, talking about Dostoyevsky and Nietzsche living at the same time with competing ideologies, during the Bolshevik Revolution, there wasn't just one revolutionary army, right? Like, there was a revolutionary army which was called the Red Army, right? And then there was what we know is the White Army. Do we know, or do
there were like Mensheviks too as well. The Mensheviks were like a little more like socialist, like they didn't necessarily feel as if it had to be all in kind of a thing. They were a little more like, we can be a little more peacefully reach this. And then you even had because you had like different factions within even the Bolsheviks, because you had like the Trotskyites, excuse me. So there was various levels too of the manner in which.
So do you have a breakdown of who is involved in those the leadership level competing factions?
No, I don't have that with me here in my notes. I do have a little bit more though when we get into the more where I get into big discussion of the who's of people is more on the occult side of some of that type stuff. You know, let me see. Hold on. Oh no, I do actually have some notes here. Forgive me. I've got so many notes. I wasn't sure which notes I had with me. I've been taking notes and sending notes and then refining notes, and so we can talk a little bit. Okay, I do have some stuff.
Okay.
Forgive me, I lied. Huh. So okay. Um, so the Bolsheviks emerged from the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in 1903. They were led by Lenin. And then, you know, his stuff was based upon obviously like Marxist theory, Russian revolutionary tradition. Where did I have that? Forgive me. There were the Mensheviks. Now, what was interesting too, if we can jump over as well with that, because I think this might be good if you guys are good, is the occult, like the people who were part of the Bolshevik faction itself, strong supporters who were also much into like esoteric beliefs like Theosophy. And Theosophy is really interesting because a lot of Theosophy spread to the United States. And what I found, and I didn't know this until recently as I was digging into some of this, because I knew there was some different Theosophy, but man, there's like big parts of San Diego in the 1900s that had a lot of Theosophy going on there. It was really interesting. And Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, which was yeah, Helen Blavatsky, because you know she happened to be in Kronstadt when St. John of Kronstadt was there, and she actually had nice things to say about St. John of Kronstadt for people interested in that. But so you had the Theosophist, Anthroposophy, and spiritualism. So these were all like big esoteric beliefs. But there were some prominent figures in the Bolshevik movement, like Maxim Gorky and Anatoly Lunacharsky. So these were guys that were big time influenced by occult ideas. Gorky, he was a writer and he was associate of Lenin, and he was fascinated with Theosophy and esoteric teachings. And Theosophy has a lot of interactions with Crowley. For those interested, as thou wilt. So instead of as going for your own will versus God's will, so operating from that perspective, again, put yourself in opposition.
You know what's really funny? It's funny. Sorry, it's something that I just thought about. Like, even with like the whole thing with like Crowley and like all that, and even the Theosophy, it's like it's so wild. Like how there used to be these so secret and kind of like low key, but how now widespread all these things are. Like if anyone listens to Bring Me the Horizon, a lot of their album art, like after a while, it's like they have that star thing sign that they had on the American flag on one of them, but it's like that's the flag for like Crowley, like that's the sign for them, and even that, and like the sign, the Sepenternal, that's the esoteric symbol, like that's on their like album, and it's just like, bro, like a lot of the stuff is now becoming so open. It's just like, no, they're why just do it in the open these days. But it's funny.
Well, I was having a discussion too, because like I love Pantera, but man, you really read the Pantera lyrics and woof, it is so much. Well, I mean, so much music. Like how many musicians have just sang praises to Aleister Crowley? You know, I mean, there's a lot of songs out there. There's one day I was digging through it. I don't remember all of them because apparently Elvis was big into Crowley. You know, you find that out.
I think he's in the Beatles too, like in Sgt. Pepper's.
Dude.
Yeah,
He's on the album cover for Sgt. Pepper's. You know, and so And I think how these things there's it's a slow roll, right? And so whereas in communism, it was rather abrupt with some of these people, and we'll talk about a bit more here. Um, it's been just part of our culture, so it's a part of the music people are singing. Hey, hey, that song by Ozzy's really cool. Oh, Mr. Crowley.
Well, I mean, if you look at the lyrics of that one, he's actually calling him out for being evil.
Yeah, but I I don't feel like he was completely opposed to the evil that he was part of. Because,
Well,
even Jimmy Page, too, like buying Aleister Crowley's house and living in Aleister Crowley's house, too. Like,
Led Zeppelin's completely Luciferian.
I, yes. And I don't think that Ozzy wasn't.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You
No, I'm not
disagree?
arguing that. I'm not arguing that Ozzy did not go down that route, but I mean, weren't you and I sharing some Black
Oh
Sabbath?
yeah. No, there's interesting, and actually we need to come back to that. That's right, because you shared that one with me. And there's definitely some interesting lyrics. I love Black Sabbath. And Black Sabbath, I think, is really they have some very interesting lyrics. I mean, like generals gathered at their masses, just like
Mhm.
witches. I mean, dude, like that song, War Pigs is so true. So very true. Um, but ultimately, to the point of what I was trying to make, and we can always have a full on discussion of some of these things because it's probably worth having. Um, Many musicians have brought Aleister Crowley out into the culture, and that becomes a manifestation of the things that he stood for within people. There was a band that I used to like too that was called Psychic TV. They were really big on a lot of Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley type stuff. And then the lead singer ended up like the guy ended up getting like hormone injections and fake breast implants. And I can't
Oh,
help but I can't help but think that like how much influence his dabbling in those things played into it. And you know, I talked about Gorky. Um, there's Lunacharsky that I mentioned too, and he was really big into like the anthroposophy. And these guys, what they did was they basically they intertwined occultism and revolutionary apocalyptic ideologies, and they wanted this to help to manifest the revolution for them. They thought that the revolution was going to be a cosmic event that's going to bring in a new order, a new era, and it's a lot enlightenment and human progress. But they were going to use these pieces of esotericism in order to do it, and it was an apocalyptic vision too that just overlaid with like the Bolsheviks, the way they did things. And so it's not surprising that you had, adult men who were raping the children of the Tsar, thinking of, what that does for the demonic aspect.
Yeah.
And, think about too as well that the terror, terror, propaganda, um, and what's interesting is how much that played into what even Dostoevsky would talk about with demons. You had psychological manipulation, controlling the narrative to shape the opinion. Um, and they were using multiple techniques, posters, films, rallies, to spread the messages. But one of the things that they did was they tapped into supernatural and mystical elements. So these so-called atheistic people, once again, they're using these forces to help control the masses as well, with folk beliefs, superstitions, to overlay and create the oppression that they wanted. And it was the Cheka itself, the secret police, that was like the key instrument of terror for them. And, you know, it was torture, summary executions, network of informants. And again, it was the characters that were in Demons, surprisingly. Um,
Yeah.
and just to think, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say yeah, and even all the stuff we've kind of touched up on, and everything that was brewing in Russia, right? Like he like as Bakunin said, he was saying God, if there is a God, is the enemy of humanity, and if God really existed, well, there needs to be a need to abolish him. So that's the kind of stuff that is like floating around. So it's like when people are fed these things, like you said, it's like the more you hear something, the more it's like it's hard to kind of resist it. And as you're kind of hearing it, and it starts influencing your thoughts and everything around you, and then yeah, you start seeing these little things like kind of start in all these areas, and it's like it's a multifaceted attack. But then even like Bakunin said, he was on the side of Satan. So it's like, yeah, like all these like atheistic, supposedly rationalistic, it's really more of a Gnostic kind of thing. It's like the more I know, the more I can use. And then nothing's off the table. So then even like Satanism, okay, is it going to give me power? Because that's what most of them tend to do. It's like, okay, then I will call in such power and see what happens. And ironically, it does, but it's like, you're giving up a part of your soul, and it's like you lose actually more than what you're getting. And I can't remember, there's a concept and it's called that, but yeah, it's yeah, like you lose more than what you're getting.
Yeah, I mean, any gain that you're getting is completely temporal in this lifetime, right? And the forever part of you, your soul, is being taken in trade.
There's another guy too that I've got here, Sergei Eisenstein. He was a big filmmaker, and he did October and Ivan the Terrible, and his movies have a bunch of esoteric and just diabolic sort of imagery as well. Now, let's see, he was born to like a Jewish family in Riga, Latvia in 1898, but he rose to prominence in the 20s for a lot of his filmmaking and avant-garde techniques. But apparently, he was rumored to be involved with Kabbalah and alchemy and Rosicrucianism. And in October, there's Kabbalistic symbolism and numerology that helped to form the narrative of the film itself.
Well, even like within like the Bricklayer Society, those guys as well, there's a big, huge Kabbalistic like influence within those societies. So it's just like, yeah, there definitely is like a lot of low key stuff that sometimes people miss. But it's like, yeah, if you look closely, you know, like if you know what you're looking for, it's like once you see something, it's hard to ignore it at some point.
Yeah. And let's see, there's one more that I've got here. So forgive me just because my jumble of notes here, but it's something to back up. Gorky, I mentioned him earlier. And he was rumored also to participate in satanic rituals. And there was even one thing that I found where one of Stalin's housekeepers have found him doing some kind of a satanic ritual one time that reported upon that. I mean, I don't know. But there was this guy, Vladimir Moyakovsky, and he wrote poetry that was laced with a lot of rebellion and nihilism. And, you know, people just said he was just a dark soul and everything like that. And then in 1930, he took his own life, you know? So I guess, you know, it's just to play into the idea that the intelligentsia that was around the Bolshevik leadership, you know, it's not just to say something that's just simply like it's anecdotal or sensationalistic, but there were a lot of people that were involved in these things. So the people who had rejected God and all these things were participating in these spiritual types of things, demon satanic worship, and it didn't seem to pay off well for many of them in the end. Must be part of their heritage or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and the other like key thing too as well is just like even like any of those movements, it's like the funding of that as well. It's just like the money just doesn't appear from nowhere. Printer machine, what is it? Money printer goes burr, you know. But it's like there's a lot of money coming from like big institutions, big you know, banking cartels and things like that from England, from the U.S., Wall Street Schiff. And you know, and especially when you have like the last Christian empire, and then even like how we touched upon earlier, like World War One, it's like you're attacking Montenegro, you're Serbia, all these Orthodox countries, surprisingly enough, get dragged into this big war that just kind of like, and it weakens all that whole area. So then now it's like they're kind of pushing things in a certain way to set up this play of like, okay, you know, we got to really weaken them. And then while someone is on the inside funding, you know, a lot of these like communist and Marxist organizations within like all of Eastern Europe. So it's like, yeah, it's not just them. It's just like, well, who else is playing them? Like, and that's the other thing when you start making these connections of follow the money, like who are these people? Who are these elites that are like doing these things? And you come to see like, okay, yeah, they have this specific ideology of full control and destruction of that regardless. And
Well, I think
yeah.
what's important though too is to the whole Ephesians thing too as well. These people rise up into the like to be these elites and things like that because they're so participatory in the hierarchy of the principalities and powers themselves. You know, like they're more in that. So they're being driven by outside forces ultimately. You know,
Well, especially for all these events to line up simultaneously, right? Like you said, the Bolsheviks split in 1903 from the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, but they didn't really start to rise to power until they're deep into World War One. And so it's like multi-pronged attack on, and there's no way it could just be like a strange set of coincidences that allow for this to happen, right? It has to be bigger. You know, and again, it's participatory. There's humans that are acting out in this created realm, this physical realm, the will of the powers and principalities as well. So it's not like that these things just all kind of, oh, it just so happened to line up. It's no, these things were planned acts and actions to take down the last Christian empire that existed. And it was a worldwide effort that allowed this to happen as well. So it happened internally at home, and it was happening while they were abroad being weakened as well. And again, like, start to look at where we are in today, it's like a lot of these things seem very similar.
well, definitely too. The rhyme keeps rhyming.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Or even like how St. Paisius has said that it's like, you know, there are things that we're all tempted with. It is just like the lower order of people, like we're given communism as a kind of like, hey, you can free yourself from all these oppression, quote unquote, right? And then other people were tempted with like Freemasonry and things like that to kind of like, you're in this cool club now, and you know, especially the higher ones. And then so it's like the devil knows how to play us in like different ways. But even then, it's like with the powers that be, it's like even he has said that, like, you know, it's a certain Z group, you know, that they're gonna use Satanism as a tool to try to take over the world. And it's like, but they're not counting that Christ and God and how things are gonna play out at the end of times. And it's just like, yeah, it's like when you play against God, like you're trying to force his hand to do something is probably like the worst. But it goes back to, you know, the passions and greed, and it's like when you want more, and it's just like they won't stop at anything, sadly. And it's like, and God bless them, and pray that they repent, because it's like, in another way, it's like, are we not in the same kind of boat where it's just like, are we not content with the things that we have, that we should be grateful for these things, and then we can fall into the same trap of being greedy and wanting too much, and then now do we not step on other people's toes around us? So it's like we should be aware of what's happening, but also be aware of what's happening within ourselves and how it reflects when we see these other things in other people.
Well, it's back to what was spoken of earlier, and you hear this too, like how many times when you're reading an elder or saint or something like that, and they're describing the faults in other people are their fault because they have not repented properly, they have not responded properly, they've caused what's actually happening. And there's a truth to that we've got to recognize, because I think there's as a nation, United States, what we were, what we've become, and I don't want to like break up everything along the way, but the challenges that we see ahead of ourselves now, and the kind of people that are in charge and the things that they stand for and everything like that, they're so amoral, and they're pushing so many just demonic kind of things as such. But as long as we're just more worried about meeting our material needs and forgoing the spiritual needs, those types of things will only manifest more and larger.
No, yeah, absolutely. And even like funny enough, coming from Russia, we had a warning from Alexander Solzhenitsyn himself. He did that speech. What was it, at Harvard or some big
Yeah.
university? And he's like,
Yeah.
look, this is what happened over there, and this is what's coming here if you don't wake up. And it's like, now it's like, okay, it's here. The chickens have come home to roost. But it's like, yeah, it's our fault for not being better Christians, not being better loving, or even just being aware that it's happening. Because sometimes even just the awareness gives you the option of like, okay, now what are you gonna do? Now you're given a choice. I mean, we always had a choice, but sometimes it's like some people really are ignorant and they have no idea. And you can't really blame them for not knowing. They're doing their best with what they have. But then now it's like, okay, for us that are see these things and can connect them, and it's like, all right, you have this knowledge. When is it going to turn into wisdom or experience to really be able to like handle it properly?
Well, there's something too, and it's in a couple of different books that I've got. But there was somebody too in Russia, a saint, and I can't remember, an elder, but just saying Russia today and America tomorrow. Like they were saying that kind of back then, and like not every prophecy comes true, because a prophecy is based upon the facts in that moment, and everybody always makes the point too as well, because there's a lot of prophecies that are occurring now. There's a lot out there from elders and things that have come true, because there's been many of these prophets that I've talked about, when it was the jabs, and many of the things that came along with that. The point that is always made is that repentance can prevent these things from happening. And it's interesting too, because yeah, man, like, because I know one of the guys that was asking the questions earlier that I was addressing, he's an inquirer, he's an Orthodox inquirer, and we get a lot of messages from people, and that's why I'm doing this. That's why I want to do this podcast, and why I talked to Slade about coming back on here, and Doc and I would talk about this all the time. I want to get this message out there, because I want people to just really understand, because I understood, I understand why the Christianity that so many people are presented with, they reject. I get it. I get it, because it's empty. But there's a lot more there, and the devil wants you to think that Christianity's empty, and it's so much more, and it's so much richer, and it's so much real. Because like what Slade was talking about, like when he talked about what his family is going through right now, and doing that, And when we become too focused on the just the material wealth of this world, can I have more than the guy next door to me? Or can I, like these guys, like I can't even imagine these billionaires these bankers, like I just have to have more. Like I imagine it's like the dragon smog or whatever, like they just have to have there's nothing else. It's just about being the one with the most, whether it's like the pharaohs that die with all their gold, and or, like they're buried with all their gold and everything like that. And what does that give them? You're the top of the heap.
Yeah, I mean, Orthodoxy is the only that I've found. I can't say only because there's so many different variants of air quote Christianity out there, but it's the only church that's a historical institution the way that it is, that teaches you to reject the world, reject and resist against the acquisition of material wealth. It's the only one that doesn't have a centralized power base with a massive amount of wealth that they control. It's the only one out there, not at least on a if there's correct teaching, which they should be, right? But obviously, we don't believe in infallibility in any human, so we do understand that heresies have always existed and will continue to persist until the end. And this is nothing new for us to be going through any types of small disagreements between jurisdictions, or if there's bishops or hierarchs falling into apostasy and heresy, like that's nothing new. But the divine institution in and of itself, the way it's been designed, because Christ did establish this church, it's a self-healing organization, right? And there's a higher level of education in the theology and teachings of the church throughout the lay people in this church than I believe anywhere else. So it allows you to recognize when error is being taught, and allows you a way to recognize it, and gives you ways to deal with it as well, and teachings on how to deal with it. But yeah, I mean, if you look at like you said, the fruits of the church is that, man, it teaches us the most biblical way to apply any of the teachings in our lives. It has the most biblical worship that exists. And when I say Bible, it's the whole canon of Scripture, right? It's the only one that has a complete theology from the first word to the last word, start to finish, from Old Testament to New Testament. All of the theophanies, like coming to that understanding, I was like, man, this makes so much more sense to me, having this complete teaching that you wouldn't get in Protestantism. Like me reading through the Bible, I'm like, I don't even know what half of this stuff means, right? Like, how is this all tied together? How is this all one thing? Well, again, just if you're inquiring, I'd say keep going, just dive into it. You'll just continue to learn, and don't fall for people's low-level arguments. Like, just look at the fruits of the church, look at the structure of the church, look at the organization, look at the teachings, and look at the worship. Every single hymn, every single thing that the church does throughout worship is biblically based, right? So for people coming out of Protestantism talking about sola scriptura, it's like, man, the most biblically based worship that exists is Orthodoxy, is the divine liturgy, is the all the services of the church, between vespers, liturgies, all the feasts, the hours of the church, like everything that exists is for the kingdom of God, and it's been teachings of Christ himself, and Old Testament, New Testament. It's complete. It's a complete theology. It's a complete ecclesiology. It's a complete worship that is rooted deeply in the Bible. And again, just read the epistles, man. If you ever any doubt of the authority of the church, just read the epistles. You have to.
What's funny too, when it comes to some of the epistles, especially the epistles of Paul, is I've come across a movement now of people who are like, Paul was a Jew, and Paul wasn't an apostle, and like these, and I was like, who do you think the other apostles were? Do you think they were born Jewish or something? Well, Jesus picked up, and it's like, so then you're saying in the Acts of these apostles that talks about Paul being confronted by Christ, that's not real? Like, I'm sorry, you brought that up, and the predilection for heresy, because you made that point too as well. Like you think of like Arius, and almost everybody was an Arian at one point, and got a guy knocked out for a guy. He got a smackdown for it, but it was something that we worked through in the church itself, and it was because it was within the framework of a church that has a very strict tradition, and tradition is so important because tradition helps to protect us from the ego of mankind, man's own hubris, to think that they can better define so many of these different pieces.
I think another concept too within that, it's like if you read, and it's just like the Holy Spirit is there to guide you to truth and all things. So it's like, then they're also inadvertently denying that the Holy Spirit was not working throughout any of that time frame. And that's the wild thing too, because I used to think, like, I was like, oh well, there is no church because everyone fell into apostasy or whatever. But it's just like, no, when you read and you see it, it's like, even with like Paul, it's like, then are you saying that the other apostles didn't have the Holy Spirit to be able to discern that Paul was saying the truth? And it's like, if like when what was it, that couple that came and lied to Peter, they said, you dare lie to the Holy Spirit? And then they dropped dead. And it's like, if the Holy Spirit was working like that at that clear of a level of just like, no, like the apostles would have known, like, right off the bat that Paul was like lying, you know what I mean? So it'd be like, nah bro, you're out. So it's like, no, it's like it maintained them in truth in all good things. So it's just like, look, like it's either you believe in the whole thing, and that's the other thing too that's sometimes hard for people to grasp, where it's like, it's a whole worldview, it's the whole enchilada. You can't separate it. It's like, you have to have the traditions, the word, the praxis, it's like, it's all one thing. And when you look at that, you live it out. And funny enough that you were mentioning that, Slade, about like you read the Bible, like before when I was a Protestant, it's like I kind of get it, but I don't know how to live it. And now it's like when you're living in the church, you read the saints, and it's like that makes much more sense as why these things like line up. And you see, not that Christ isn't a good, like he's the example, but yeah, sometimes for us, like even John Chrysostom says that, yeah, like if you read the Beatitudes and even other things, it's like there's a higher and lower order of kind of these things where it's like, yeah, not everyone's going to reach that. That's okay. It's a matter of you trying consistently. But it's like, you see it in the saints. It's like they're truly living it. And even the contemporary ones, it's like they're within our lifetime and they're still doing the things that Christ is asking 2,000 years later, and their church is continuing, like, putting out these amazing saints. And they differ in small things, but in all the stuff, it's like they're all the same. And it's only a small, like, personality wise is different, but it's like, that's how it's like it's true. It's like they all have the same thing going on, and that's been such a great help too, because it's like okay, yeah, that makes sense. We do have friends, we do have people that are helping us, and it's like it gives you a little bit of relief, because you're like, oh man, it's a high bar to kind of try to reach, but it's like, but it's also good because like, okay, I have to struggle.
I always find it fun. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that I've heard arguments, for other churches claiming that that they are the true, air quote, true church. And one of the things that You hear the Roman Catholics say a lot today is like, well, you can see our church is being persecuted. And I'm like, well, you mean persecuted by your own Pope? Like,
he's pointing out the homosexual nature occasionally of
just the total lack of consistency in that church. I think it's like a bear up there right now. Sorry, that's why I keep looking. I think I hear a bear up there. But
well, what would you rather be with the bear or be with us in the woods? That stupid woman with a man or a bear.
Does Slade really poop in the woods? Like,
we're ready.
Yeah.
Always ready. You got to keep that thing on you out here, dude. But no, so like, I would like to, like, I don't know if that is like such a strong argument. That's one that's not like the piece of evidence that says, oh, this is the true church, but it is, it is an indicator of what the true church is, and kind of circling us back to where, the topic for today. I know we're all over the place, but
and part of it, and forgive me too, because I'm still kind of sick, and so I know I'm not like
yeah, no,
I keep seeing you look back, man. You need to, if you need to, you need to go inside.
Sounds like it's getting closer. But some of the what were the goals of the Bolshevik Revolution? Like, what were they? Like, we talked about some of the influences of the.
Well, I mean, it was
within that. But what was the goal of the revolution? I know it's multiple lines, right? Like they basically outline everything they're doing, but you can see by their fruits that there is massive persecution on the church, right? And like, do we have some of the numbers, the examples of where the church was, where it ended up in certain parts of the years, how Orthodoxy left Russia, and this was, God always uses everything for good. If there's something that's happening, he's going to use some of that for good as well, right? Like that spread Orthodoxy outside of Russia as well during that time period. But I want to go some, like, I'm just hitting wave tops here. I want some of the harder facts of where we're at with all of.
So I know there's a blend of numbers. At a minimum, 200,000 clergy were killed. So monastics, priests, nuns were killed and in horrific ways. Like, we talked earlier, like the White Army. So there was a nun monastic community at one point, and it was an area that was controlled by the White Army, and the White Army had come through that place, just as an example. And when the Bolsheviks came through and attacked, they forced the nuns to endure like molten communion. And one of the things you find quite common across when the communists took over is the way that they would invert the practice of the communion. So they poured molten metal down these women's throats to kill them, just because the White Army had been there. There's one guy. Oh man, I've got it in here somewhere. The torture that they had with these people, it was just the delight they had in torturing these people, because again, they're Christians, they're evil. They threw like Grand Duchess Elizabeth down a well alive. There was scalping of priests alive. I think, in total, initially, it was something like 2 million Christians. And again, I'm trying to be on the conservative end, because there's numbers that take it as high as 20 million, and it's hard to substantiate fully. And I don't doubt that. I just want to make sure, like, it's on the conservative end, because that's still a lot. Think of that, 200,000 clergy, because think of churches too as well. Like, you're talking hundreds of thousands of churches. Like they would just go in and just blow these places up. And it created, obviously there was an underground church that formed, and these people were persecuted. They created what they called it's called Sergianism, a parallel version of the church that was Metropolitan Sergius. And so this was a guy who was picked and handpicked by the communists, and he was leading a church, and it was a rationalistic church that didn't have to follow a lot of the standards. It's very similar, you'll find, to the church that has been created in the Ukraine.
OCU.
Yeah. So you've got the UOC and the OCU. The UOC is
Canonical.
Yep, and I want to say, like, they don't, like, they have differences with Metropolitan Kirill. However, at the same time too, canonical. There's that nature of it. And so, they weren't like, hey, glad you Russians are coming into our country. Good show, guys. No, it wasn't like that at all. Nevertheless, it was the OCU was created as a
State
Ukrainian's own church, even though a Ukrainian church already existed there. And it's a totally bastardized version of the church that doesn't follow the practices and standards of Orthodoxy in many ways, shape, or forms. And many of these people perform.
They have like rock shows, like inside like a
Oh,
Protestant
dude,
style, like liturgy and everything. Like it's
I'm trying to. They're just blasphemous. It's just
Yeah.
complete blasphemy.
That's nothing new, right? Like that's a copy paste from this same time period, correct?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
because
like,
the living church
and
was
that's
under
what's-
control of the communists, and like they were like, hey, if we just listen to the state, it'll be okay, bro. Like, don't worry about it. Just lock everything down. It'll be okay. Like, just, but yeah, it's definitely like they came under that control of like, hey, no, we just gotta listen to them, and it'll be okay. Like, but it's like, nah, it's like when you give up Christ, it's like, yeah.
like defrocked priest from
different jurisdictions.
with that, and they're even doing it more in a Byzantine rite as well. And I mean Byzantine Catholic rite. So I should be clear of that, because Byzantine is Orthodox too. So, but Byzantine Catholic, right? Like they're changing so many things of it, and that's what they did. And one thing you'll always find is it's trying to destroy the access to the Eucharist, and whatever you can do to destroy the ritual itself that interferes with that. And so Metropolitan Sergius thought that he was going to somehow, I don't even know what he thought. I don't want to say I know. He was able to get power. He was able to control a church there and under the Soviets, while multiple clergy were being executed and tortured and killed all over the country and thrown into gulags and the whole system like that, and just repeatedly tortured. Yeah, but he was still leading a church, and he would deny what was occurring. And at the same time, Metropolitan Tikhon was actually still in existence, and they were trying to negotiate with him that to create the new church. And then multiple attempts on Metropolitan Tikhon's life. He got killed. You'll hear of places, St. Tikhon's. It's not uncommon. That's the school out in Pennsylvania, and there's a monastery with that. And there's many churches, St. Tikhon's, that are named after him. And he came here to the United States. He was the guy that helped to spread, before communism, he spread Orthodoxy. Like him, Saint Raphael, Saint Innocent. These are guys that brought it here. The blessing, though, of that is somebody like Saint John of Shanghai and San Francisco. So he's a guy that, an interesting story too with like Saint John. So this is a guy who was in Kharkov, grew up in the Kharkov region of Ukraine. Very pious individual that from, like a young age wanted to be, devoted to the priesthood. He was going to a military school. In the military school, there was like they were walking by and like the bells of the church rang, and he saluted the bells at a young age. When the Soviets took over in Kharkov, they were trying to, question him, imprison him, and everything like that. And they recognized this was a guy that like he didn't care. He was so like into God, praying and everything like that. And you'll hear lots of stories of the new martyrs of Russia, of people that were like that. Like you couldn't shake their faith. He managed to get to Serbia initially, was teaching in Belgrade, or maybe it was Belgrade. I want to say, I'm pretty sure it was Belgrade. He was instructing there. Spread to France, also Russian Orthodoxy, but then ultimately he ended up in China. In China, he was leading the church there. He was noted for just taking care of orphans. They escaped. So when communism, communism was taking over China, and I mean, there's so many stories. Like I want to say so much about Saint John of Shanghai and San Francisco because I love the man. He's one of my favorites. Escaped with his people to the Philippines, and when they got to the Philippines from there, this was like tons of Russians too as well. He got to the United States, to San Francisco, and he couldn't bring the people over. So he went and sat in front of Congress for days on end and just bugged people in Congress to help to bring people over. And he had a speech impediment too as well, but the guy spoke multiple languages. But he just fought and he brought a bunch of people over. And Our Joy, is it Our Joy of All Sorrows in San Francisco, I think is the name of the church there that ultimately he set up. And that's where his body now reposes. And interesting, like tales of him that they have to change his shoes. And what's interesting too is because they have to change his shoes because he always was known. People would give him his shoes even when he was like in Shanghai, and somebody would give him shoes, but then they'd see some orphan kid walking around with the shoes. Like the guy would keep vodka with him because, people would throw babies away into the dumpsters. And so he would bribe like homeless dudes around there that were psychotic with like bottles of vodka so he could take the children back to the orphanage. But he's got his relics, his remains. They're incorrupt in San Francisco there, and they have to change his shoes because they wear down. And multiple people will tell this story of that. And he's ultimately now I think it was Archbishop Anthony, another Russian, who had actually brought Father Serafim Rose, Saint Seraphim of Platina, brought into the church, but he ended up being the spiritual father to Father Seraphim. And that man spread so much the church across the world. And so while Russia suffered, the people themselves, people like St. John spread that. And there's Archbishop of Verki as well is another one who helped to set up the Holy Trinity Orthodox Seminary that's in New York State as well, which is a great teaching institution there. They've got a great bookstore, but a great seminary that has spread and across. You've got Vladimir Losky, many people who they spread this knowledge across the world. And that's, yes, while it was a dark time for the Russian people, a light was spread across the world. And there's many people, including me, and including H, who've been touched by you know, tell the story too, like your wife, please, if you wouldn't mind, Slade, you know, the oil from St. John.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we live in Southern Oregon, so it's not too far away from San Francisco. So some folks every once in a while will go down there and visit the reliquary and, you know, attend a liturgy down there. And one of the guys in our church gave us, that exact same bottle right there that you've got in your hand, from the reliquary of St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco, holy oil. And my wife had like crazy like carpal tunnel, some tendon damage in her wrist to the point where it was difficult for her to even like hold a pan in just that one hand, right? Like I'm just trying to think of like her vocation, and she's always in the kitchen cooking and all that stuff, but and baking. And you know, this is going on for almost a year. Literally within 24 hours of that first application of the holy oil, after we got it, because somebody from church was like, hey, just rub some of this on it, that'll help. And I was like, okay, because we're newer in the church. I'm like, I don't know. All right, we'll try it, of course. And dude, I'm not even kidding you. Like the next morning, she's like, Slade, the pain is gone. I don't know what to tell you. Like you've been working on this for almost a year, like trying to, you know, massage, rub, stretch, like all of that stuff, all the muscles in her forearm and her hand, and just trying to work on that soft tissue damage that she had. And again, like, you know, not even 24 hours. I mean, I put it on at night, and the next morning she woke up and it hasn't come back since. And I haven't had to keep like putting the holy oil on it or anything like that. It's just, yes. And not to say like miracles are something that we're seeking, but you know, when you have the understanding that there's a metaphysical reality that exists, and you know, people again matching their will with the Father, like you do that consistently enough for enough time, you will become a saint. Saints have an extra amount of grace to them. That's why their relics remain uncorrupt, because the grace that has permeated their physical bodies as well, still
Well, and
abounds.
and what that is too is that's what mankind was meant to be in the garden. We were our souls and our bodies were not to become corrupt, and it was that death of the garden that was brought the split of our soul from our body. And so that's why that occurs. Like they've worked so hard to bring that soul and that body back together into what it's meant to be.
We're meant to be
Correct,
gods
yeah.
by grace. Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like
It's unnatural. Death was not a creation. God did not create death. He allowed death to enter the world so we wouldn't have to live eternally in sin. But yeah, and that's why we have such a strange understanding and innate fear of death, because it is unnatural. It's not supposed to happen. And yeah, so like Natara said, like Serafim just said, the saints lived in a way that it is the rejoining of the heavenly with the material, right? Like their bodies are incorrupt. And there is a reason why they still die, because it's just where we're at right now. That's the result of the fall. And you just get to see by grace, by God's grace, that they are different. They are separate from the rest of the world. And literally everybody has that. Everyone has that potential. Every single human has that potential. You know, it's just.
And forgive me, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, because like Elijah in the Old Testament, you know, like there's these tales, these people, like he went off into his chariot into heaven, and that's real, you know. And then they sit in the council with hey the sorry Nectario's daughter came along, and she's great. But this is something that happened, and it still happens. These people, it's still going and it's still ongoing. And if you go strictly by this sola scriptura type thing, then you think that all of a sudden somehow it just ends there, or the miracles are some kind of weird snake thing or something. I don't even. But
Yet sola scriptura dudes believe in continuous revelation, it seems.
yeah, and so then why wouldn't the Book of Mormon be real? And why wouldn't why and if the Holy Spirit is speaking, I was thinking then so the Reverend Jim Jones and numerous other like weird sort of things, then how do you argue against that? Because then there's no basis.
I think the other thing it does is that it destroys hope. Like, you know what I mean? Because like even like how we were saying earlier during the revolution, it's like like the Russia wasn't a place where like it just didn't happen overnight. You know what I mean? And it's like, but it did bring good out of it. It did spread Christianity out. But then it also created a lot of martyrs and people to really like be strong during those times, because now we can look back and be like, look, if they didn't give up during that, why am I not fighting any harder? You know what I mean? Or even like at the saints, it's like, look, there is life after death. And some people are like, oh, why do you pray to someone who's dead? It's like, because my God is alive. And there's life after death.
People are alive.
And it's like, and there's hope. And it's just like, to deny that even is like to deny Christ. Because it's like when Christ, the transfiguration, who was with him like when he like fully showed himself, he revealed himself, right? Like yeah, I know, but like it was Moses
Moses and Elijah.
Yeah. So it's like they're alive. And it's like, how did the apostles recognize them? You know what I mean? It's not for nothing. It's like it's a living thing.
Peter's all like, "Hey, what should I do? Hey, let me go set up a tent for everybody."
Or even the Battle of Kulikovo. You know what I mean? It's a perfect example. It's like Russia. It's like they were outnumbered completely against like well, not Genghis Khan, but Mamai. I think that was his name. And it's like their faith in God and in trust in him, they went to pray with Saint Sergius, I think, before, and they came out victorious and things like that. And even when things seem so desolate, we are given hope in these small little avenues, and it's something that it's like anywhere outside of that, it's like what are you hoping for? Yeah. Oh, Gideon too, yeah.
I mean that's the reality of so much of this, man. When Slade comes back here, and it looks like we're kind of doing down time, and I'm honestly, guys, like I'm kind of, I don't know if you can tell, but my energy's like, oof. I mean, if you guys want to keep on, that's cool, but like I'm my ability to I'm a bit weak.
We'll definitely have to do a continuation because we barely even touched the surface of any of this stuff, man. Like,
no, I know, and I think I want to re-listen to it and kind of see what we've left off, because I think the Romanian piece of it, to jump into that as well, because I think that's, and then some other pieces perhaps, and so
again, like we kind of dove off onto this of what some of the good that did come out of it was the spread of Orthodoxy and revelation of, not like divine revelation, but a revealing of who the true church was and is, versus those that you can't blame people that were scared and folded, but it showed the strength in the true faith in Christ with all the martyrs. I know that Father Serafim Rose would write constantly, and he was another one that said, today in Russia, tomorrow in the world, tomorrow in the United States, basically, to summarize. And he also utilized the example of the persecution of the church, of that pointing to the true church, and the resilience of the martyrs and the clergy and everybody else who stood strong under the yoke of the godless authority. So I think there's a lot of, we still haven't even gone down like the path of how evil and dark this was. We've kind of just like wave topped it, I think. And I know, like, dude, your notes are so rich, and like you did so much research, and you barely like skimmed any of that stuff. So I know, like, we just need to, I think, dive down into some more of the nitty gritty,
yeah. And And if you wouldn't mind, if you've got it too as well, because I'm kind of in that sort of, headspace. Um, whether it's today, tomorrow, or next couple days, like make some notes for me too as well. Like, next, like where further we can focus as such, because I'm just kind of winging it here a bit. And glad to just like put that focus that way. There's more depth or whatever. Because, like I've been diving into a lot of this, and I think there's a lot to be learned from it, as well. And I think one of the things that I want to say before we jump off here is one of the things that I always find so interesting in our view of history, um, in the perspective is the way so often you hear people denigrate Tsar Nicholas II, and it's like, man, like there's, oh, he was a weak man, all this stuff, and it's like he was a God-fearing man that had a noble class that was betraying him, and his family was murdered in front of his eyes, and his daughters were raped, and he was a strong man, but he had very limited support in what he was doing, you know? And I just can't even imagine the betrayal and what that man experienced. He's a martyr, and that's why he's a saint.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and it's like but we're so used to just taking in the propaganda from like the current like historical narrative of like monarchs bad, like democracy
Monarch
good,
bad.
Yeah,
mud
who's writing
democracy.
who's controlling all that news and history? So weird. How we don't one
I don't
perspective
know, man. I
Hmm.
can't think. Can't think. Can't think.
seems to be like a certain group.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Oh man. I guess we'll leave it to the audience to maybe come up with an idea.
And we could just
Like,
wind it down and shut it down.
shut it down.
They're noticing.
Their nose to see.
Look, bro, that just happens to be a coincidence, but anyway. uh,
All right, brothers. Yeah, I appreciate you guys taking the time today. And I'm sorry I'm not in the full headspace here, but perhaps, perhaps the next time, same bat time, same bat time. No, we'll no. Next time we do this, we'll hit this, and we'll dive into some of these different areas too as well, because there's a lot to talk about this, and I think that even there's some interesting, as I brought up too as well, like parallels of these things, lessons that we have. There's things with the Maccabees, Habakkuk, and um, deliverance and redemption and renewal. Um, but yeah, so thank you, Slade, for joining joining Nectarius and I once again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm gonna pull up a bunch of weeds and put some more soil down and plant some more herbs up here.
And
Try to get like a little herb garden going right here, so we don't have to go down to the farm area to pull herbs.
hopefully the bear will keep his distance, but you're ready if he doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. It just sounded like when crash. I mean, we got them all over the place here. It just sounded like when crashing around up there.
Yeah. Cool.
just pray to Saint Seraphim of Sarov. Maybe he'll come give you a hug. That bear.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah,
I'm not there yet.
yeah. Right on. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Yep.
All right,
Have a great Saturday.
you guys.
See ya. Here. How's the kitty cat? Cheese. How's cheese?